Welcome to the American Conservative Values Network, where we strive to preserve, protect, and defend those ideals that have made the United States the greatest nation on earth in all of its history, and where we try to exchange some ideas and try to remember the great ideals that have come from some of the best documents ever written in history, such as the English and American Bill of Rights, the United States Declaration of Independence, and the United States Constitution. I'm Mike Swope, sitting in for Bishop Ira Combs in the center seat instead of over here to the side where I normally am, and I'm joined by Ashtok Thitha, realtor with Exit Realty in Jackson.
Thank you.
And it's good to have you again. We've done a few shows before, and they've been lively. So looking forward to another lively show. And this time I want to get into some economic issues because, of course, the economy is a big problem for all of us, and it's something that we all have to worry about. But also, it is a major factor in the election campaign that we have coming up at all levels. Let's face it, all candidates have to worry about it, whether you're running, for the very top spot in the land or whether you're running for the most local of all seats. The economy is one of the things that you've got to worry about, and part of that is because government regulates the economy and sometimes gets too involved in the economy. So, we've got 29 minutes to play with here today. So let's talk about some of the things that could be done to make the American economy, and if we can pull it off, the world economy, better for everybody. So what are some things that you have?
I think I have some recommendations to improve the economy down here.
Okay. In Jackson?
In all over America.
Okay.
Yeah. I see a lot of imports. Import is what, when you import the commodities from other countries, you have to pay taxes, you have to pay them the currency in exchange. But other side, it kills our employment. We do not produce enough, and we do not have much employment. So we need to encourage people to the companies, they should produce down here and export, or the companies who they're importing the commodities, they should be told like part of it should be an exchange or barter system.
Okay. Let's talk about some basic economic principles because that's a lot of what comes up in your suggestions. So let's take a look at the question: why do nations import? Let's start with that question. So why is it that nations import goods? What are some of those factors? One of them would be lack of resources to produce those goods natively. Another factor would be that those goods cannot be produced at a competitive price natively.
You got that?
So then, but let's stop on that one for a minute, okay? So in America, in 2012, what are some of the factors that are keeping companies from producing goods at a competitive rate, at a competitive world rate? What are some of those factors? Because you got it, because that's a problem you got to solve. If you're not going to import as much and you want to export, then you've got to increase domestic production.
That is true.
But how can you increase that domestic production at a competitive rate?
Well, I believe they should do some kind of shows where the government should.
Remember, if we're going to fix the world, we've got to be specific.
Yeah, government should encourage to do the shows, like showing people the technology, the machinery they can buy, or they can finance and produce things, and then take it to the government.
Is it really? In thinking along economic lines, is that really government's role And more importantly, is it something that government can do well?
Government is the one who makes the policies about import, export, the economy.
Right, and that's something that a lot of people don't understand, is that a lot of these import-export functions have, in economics, that's, one of the things that you're always going to have in the development of a site, you're going to have government first and then economy, because it's the government who dictates the rules for the economy.
Yep.
The government dictates how the economy is going to run. So, but in a free market system, is it really the place of a government, and particularly given the American Constitution, given the division of government, is it the place of the federal government to do that? I would argue no. Based on a constitutional issue, it's not. That is not the federal government's place. The federal government is not given. It is not given plenary power to just make up whatever rules it wants to, or to undertake whatever activities it wants to. In fact, under the American Constitution, and I've said this on the show many times, but not when you've been here. So let me let you in on this background, so you know where my argument's going to come from. Under the Constitution, the federal government was given primary power in only 4 areas. And those 4 areas were foreign affairs, collective defense, interstate relations, and colonies. There's nothing in the American Constitution that says that the United States government may force you to do something economically, that it should do something economically. Really the most significant thing, actually the 2 most significant things that the American Constitution says about the economy is that it says that the federal government may regulate interstate commerce. It doesn't say it can make you do things, it just says it can regulate interstate commerce. Then the other big thing it says about it is that all the rules, that rights regarding commerce must be equal among the states. It cannot discriminate in its rule writing. So, and then you go to the 10th Amendment, which kind of is the exclamation point at the end of the Bill of Rights that were adopted, that says that it's kind of this exclamation point that says that the text says that all the power is not specifically delegated, not specifically assigned to the United States government by the Constitution, and not prohibited to the states by it, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. So that would seem, that to do what you'd want to do would be a state level function. According to the Constitution, the state could do that. But then we get to the question of, is the government any good at it? And if we've learned anything from 6,000 years of civilization, is that the answer to that is no. So, so I disagree with you on having the government, on having the government do that, because the government, particularly in a day of rapid advance in technology, the government can barely write laws to regulate the technology that's coming out, much less develop the technology. And what we've learned over the last 300 years of Western civilization is that individuals and businesses are much better at that technological innovation. Now, can the government play a role? A very limited role. My 3rd law of economics, my personal laws of economics, there's 3 of them. The 3rd one says that government can play only a limited and long-term role in creating economic good, but it has immediate and infinite capacity to cause economic harm. And there's a whole bunch of proof to both of those things. So what governments can do is to write rules that encourage exactly the development that you want. They can write rules that make the production and purchase of goods and services at a competitive rate possible. What a government cannot do is it does not have a magic wand that it can wave and make things better.
Well, I have some example. Since I am from India, let me tell you one story about import-export. Well, government encouraged the people, business people, who they were in the business, they were producing things, they encouraged them to export. And when they have the income on it, that was totally tax-free income. And you know, when people are encouraged like that, they are boosting themselves in overseas, you know, and they are trying every possible things to make more money, right?
Right.
And what is helping? The economy is getting better, government is getting better, and the businessman who is exporting and on his income, he is not paying any income tax.
But see, you've got a really good point there. Really good example here in India, because in India, beginning with independence from the British in 1947, India was first a dominion for 3 years. Then it became a republic within the Commonwealth. But really, right into the 1980s, India was dominated by one party, and it was dominated really by, and not just by one party, but by one family.
Congress Party, Jawaharlal Nehru.
The Congress Party and the Nehru family, and
Yep.
then subsequently Indira Gandhi and her son
Yep.
Rajiv.
Yep.
So, but the policies of the Congress Party, I would argue, kept India down. And because, isn't it true that really that the Congress Party had the Indian government in a very interventionist role in the Indian economy, and not just interventionist in terms of the government intervening, but let's face it, especially toward the end, Indira and Rajiv both ran pretty corrupt governments.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to say about the economy, how they boosted the economy down there, how they did the export-import, and the government encouraged people in exchange of your export, you can bring the technology here.
Yep. But my question is, I'm not disagreeing with you. The question is, when were those decisions made? It was after the Congress Party was swept out of power.
No, it was in the regime actually. It started with the Jawaharlal Nehru's regime, right?
But Indira Gandhi and Rajiv kind of turned the clock back on that. It really wasn't until they were swept out of power that in more modern times, really within the last 15 to 20 years, that the Indian economy has taken off, specifically because there's now competitive parties. Congress Party is no longer the monolith, and more specifically, you don't have one family running what I call a kleptocracy, a government of thieves. When you agree with that point, that really what you had to do is you needed to sweep that Congress Party kleptocracy out of the way and have the Indian government come in and relieve those restrictions and get those corrupt bureaucrats out of the way and write those rules where it made sense. It made it profitable for Indian companies to produce, not just locally, but to produce for export and not have to pay bribes or not be restricted by artificial laws. Take for example Tata Motors. Tata Motors become one of the, in just a span of 30 years, has become one of the most important car companies in the world. But that's because the wraps are taken off.
Well, part of their policy which promoted the businesses, which promoted the economy, and no matter who it is coming, when they write the policies, the following regime, they have to follow those policies too. And economy is booming. I'm taking one example, and I brought you like that. How did they encourage people to export? And then after, there is a lot of things behind it, manufacturing, and they are introducing technology.
But your example also buttresses the my third law is that it's not government that's doing this. It's private people that are doing it, but government is creating the conditions and then giving out the way.
Government is encouraging them,
Right.
and they are the ones who enforce the policies too.
Yeah, but the Indian government, so the Indian government has written rules for the economy that allow people to profit from their endeavors. And that encourages those endeavors, but at the same time, the Indian government has also gotten out of the way and is not picking favorites. It's not, it's not saying we're going to give, these people get special laws that help them, and these people that we don't like get laws that are detrimental to them.
One more recommendation: they should be our American government should be stressing on the public transportation, the railways. Encouraging people to travel. When you use public transportation, you use railways and transport things to the
transportation locally or long distance?
Long distance and publicly. That creates a lot of jobs to people.
But again, you've got a constitutional problem. There is no role for the federal government in that. And again, I would argue that the federal government has actually been in the way of that. In the United States, plus, when you talk about public transportation, what do you talk about when you talk about public transportation? Because I think public transportation is one of those terms that people use, and you may be thinking of something in your head when you say public transportation, and me and the viewers might be thinking a lot of other things. So when you say public transportation, give me a definition.
Like going by train, by metro, going in the buses, instead of using your cars. Car is this time very expensive. Not only gas, maintenance, buying the car is fortune to spend on it. Very challenging. But when you have to go to 100 miles from here today, and you can travel by train, you open up a lot of doors to shop around. You go to competitors. There's a lot of expenses and a lot of
Right, but I would argue that in some respects you're wrong. And again, my background is more libertarian and free market, and I am someone who has to drive not 100 miles, but there are some days because I live in South Central Michigan and I work in the Metro Detroit area. There are days where I have to drive 80 miles one way. It depends on what I've got going on. I would argue that a car is actually less expensive than a train, both to me and to society, and it's more energy efficient as well. Because when I get in my car, I'm going from point to point directly, and I'm also not wasting time. My time is a resource just as much as my money. It may in fact be a more valuable resource. So when I go from point to point, I'm not wasting resources. For example, where public transit, let's say that we use your example of the train, it's very unlikely that the train is going to go directly from where I come from to directly where I need to be. So that means that I have to take some sort of conveyance from home to get to a transfer point to the train. Then I have to wait for a train that is going to somewhere near where I'm going to go. And then that train eventually gets to somewhere near where I'm going to go. And then I have to get another conveyance to go from that point to where I actually need to be. And in all those cases, there is energy being wasted because there's no guarantee that the train that I'm going to take long distance is going to be full. So the train moves where, and this is one of the inefficiencies. This is what people don't understand about public transportation is that the buses move whether people around or not. And so it's really inefficient from an energy standpoint. Public transportation is not it's not the energy savings, it's not the environmental savings that people think. Because all those vehicles move, whether people are on them or not. So in fact, from an energy standpoint, and from a time standpoint, from a monetary standpoint, it is more efficient to move individually than it is in groups most of the time. I'm not saying that that there aren't some circumstances where where you can find a difference, but here's part of the problem. In those circumstances where you do have enough riders to make it worth running those buses and running those trains, and to have them be economically viable, where you don't have to subsidize. Take for example, in Jackson, the Metro Jackson Transit Authority has to subsidize 89 cents out of every dollar for every rider. So for every rider, someone else has to pay 89 cents of the cost. The rider only pays 11 cents of the cost. That's not efficient there. In areas where you have a high density population, those are areas where public transportation can work economically and make sense environmentally. But then you have costs that are associated with that high density population, because you have much higher cost of living. You also have less space. You also sacrifice things like privacy, which should not be underestimated. And there are a lot of environmental and energy costs with having high densities of population, such as where you have cities such as Boston, New York, Chicago, where where you do have public transportation systems, you do have viable train and bus systems, or for that matter, Philadelphia is another city that I can think of. But those high densities have their own environmental and economic costs associated with them. So, but long distance, I don't think the argument works as well, because you don't have, again, if you're going to have that public transportation, whatever you're using, train, plane, bus, it's going to move whether it's loaded or not. And a private company can make decisions. Take, for example, a train. A privately owned railroad company can take a look at its operations. And in fact, this is what they have to do. Same thing with airplane companies. Same thing with bus companies. They have to take a look at their routes. And if they're not getting enough ridership or enough freight on those routes, then either they have to cut back the number of runs on those routes, or they've got to cut those routes out altogether. And that makes it more efficient. Government does not do that. And again, Jackson Transportation Authority is a great example of that. Because Jackson Transportation Authority runs buses to places where there might only be one person. It may be more economical to send a cab out to get that person. But because of the hue and cry, we can't possibly get rid of the bus. Otherwise, how are we going to get back and forth? Politically, you can't do it. And so, in that case, you have, and this is true all over the country. Wherever you have these local bus systems, if there's the merest hint that a bus might, a number of bus runs might be cut, or that a route might be cut out. Oh, there's massive cry, because you can't possibly do that. It's too cruel. But what you do in that case is you waste money. You waste energy. It's not energy efficient. Public transportation is not energy efficient in that case. So, I agree with you in the general circumstance that we need more exports, we need more imports. But I don't agree with you that government is the vehicle for that. Government is, and to go back to the example of India, Government needs to get out of the way, because that's what happened in India. That's why India is one of the fastest growing economies in the world right now, is because the government is getting out of the way. It's undoing all those old socialist and all those corrupt raps on the people, and it's allowing the people of India to make money off of what they've learned how to do well. And to the credit of the people of India, they're learning how to do more things well. And but it's because they're being allowed to do that now, instead of having the thumb of a government on them, taxing them to take their money to give to other people that the government decides should have it more, or for that matter, taking their money for the government officials to use. Because that was, that historically was one of the problems. Not just with India and independence, it's also one of the problems with India when it was a British colony as well. Is that there's too much selective enforcement of laws, too much privilege involved, and and so I think India is a good case, but India is a good argument for loosening those restrictions and for writing rules that are fair to everyone, that apply to everyone equally. India is a great example of that, and what's more, India is also one of our best allies, one of our most reliable allies in Asia, and by golly, it's I hope that those relations continue, because there's heritage that Western culture draws from India that a lot of people in the West aren't really aware of, and I think it's a good thing that we're finding more out about each other, for that matter.
Yep.
So yeah, there's. You're right. America needs to export things, but imports aren't necessarily a bad thing, because it happens on the basis of economics. And if there are things that we cannot produce competitively anymore, then those are things that we have to let go. Realistically, we need to figure out why we can't do that. For example, the making of cars. Why is it that we can't make cars, or seem not to be able to make a lot of cars on a competitive basis, whether it be competitive in terms of quality or competitive in terms of price with the rest of the world? What are the factors getting in the way? And I don't think, particularly in Michigan, I don't think we've faced those questions honestly. Because
cost of living is way too high.
Cost of living is way too high. There are also a lot of people who have a vested interest in getting as much money as they can in the short run, namely the UAW, union bosses. They want to squeeze whatever they can while they can get it, but at the same time, doing that undermines your businesses in the long run. And I don't know if Michigan's ready to face those problems with a high cost of unionization yet. Every time you talk about it, it causes a political row in Michigan. And in fact, there's going to be one way or another. You've got proponents of labor freedom laws called right to work. You've also got people who are putting up petitions for that would guarantee the unions would be able to guarantee compulsory unionism. So it's a lightning rod issue in Michigan. So I'm not sure that that argument is going to have to be one. Those debates are going to have to take place one way or another. So we're getting close to the end of our time. So Ashtok, I want to thank you for another good show.
Thanks for having me.
Again, this is Ashtok Thitha, who is a realtor at Exit Realty in Jackson. So if you need some property, go talk to him. He is a good man to talk to, and he will take good care of you. And as you can see, he knows a lot about things beyond Jackson too. So make sure you go do business with him if you're in the Jackson area. Again, Bishop Combs will be back in a future show, be back in this seat where he should be, so I can be over there where I should be. But in the meantime, I'm Mike Swope bidding you a good night. Go out, be responsible for yourself and your family. Go do good things for the world. Don't be a leech on other people. And from all of us here at the American Conservative Values Network, good night.
Thank you.